Hi, here we are with Martin Hulbert, and my name is Pat Brans. I'm a freelance journalist for several publications, including Computer Weekly, EE Times, and CIO.com. And here I am with Martin. And Martin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm the technical director at Ignite Technology. My role is focused around the more technical aspects of the products and services that we offer, right across sales, support, and services. And I've got a focus on sort of automation and project and portfolio management technologies.
Okay, well, those are hot topics today, and I have some questions for you. Let's start out with some definitions. I think it's nice to start out with making sure we're all on the same page, and let's see what you think what your answers to these questions are. So first of all, let's start out with, what is a data pipeline?
Okay, yeah, so a data pipeline is essentially, the stream of data across an organization from start to finish. So when we talk about data pipelines, what we're talking about is the data starting at its source, which could be multiple systems, and then moving across the organization, across perhaps, again, multiple systems, until it eventually ends up in its destination point. And that could be a data lake or a data warehouse, where it's then used for further analysis and collated together.
Okay, now you say that's across an organization, but what about across the supply chain, for example?
Yeah, exactly. So the source systems can be across different suppliers, vendors, partners. They could even be government bodies where data is being sourced to collate into, the analysis that's required by the organization. So it can be literally across anywhere these days.
Okay, and then another term that we hear a bit about these days is data pipeline orchestration. Can you tell me what your definition of that is?
Yeah, so the data pipeline orchestration is around taking all the individual components that make up your pipeline, to wherever they come from all those different systems, where they be disparate or in-house, wherever they are, and essentially orchestrating them to allow the data pipeline to flow. So if you imagine you've got say 50 different jobs and tasks that run to get all of the data together for your analysis, then you orchestrate those from one central point and you administer them from one central point. And of course, by doing that, it means you have full visibility and control over everything that's going on in that pipeline.
Okay, and where do you see? I mean, I can take some guesses, but hear you from the expert. In what industries and use cases is data pipeline orchestration most important? Can you give us a few examples?
So examples are easy because we actually find it everywhere. So there isn't probably an organization today that exists, as we know, technology is at the forefront of every organization. So there isn't probably an organization that exists that doesn't have a data pipeline somewhere within it. And, the use cases tend to be around criticality, to be perfectly honest. So if we've got a pipeline that's critical for regulatory or for say ECG or for business intelligence that's needed, those tend to be the ones that get orchestrated, because we need to make sure they're reliable, we need to make sure they are running on time and efficient, and the criticality of those generally tends to warrant the extra investment into an orchestration.
Okay, and you mentioned regulatory compliance. I don't know if you use that word, but regulatory compliance. Is there anything, any sort of a standard certification of somebody that comes along and says, okay, well, they've done this right, therefore they're compliant in terms of automation?
No, not in terms of the actual automation itself. It would generally be to support compliance. So be it financial compliance for financial institutions, be it for utility companies to show compliance with the regulatory bodies that are monitoring them. Anything that essentially requires the data to be compiled correctly and brought in and done on a regular basis. These reports go out on a regular basis. They have to be right. So those are the ones where, not essentially a certificate on the automation itself, but obviously where it's supporting an organization proving to a regulatory body that it is compliant.
Okay, all right. And what about is visibility? Is visibility one of the challenges with data pipeline orchestration? If so, yeah.
If we take the example of kind of bringing lots of pieces of information together from various suppliers, different systems, be they SaaS, cloud, on-premise. How do you monitor that? If you've got all these disparate jobs and tasks running that produce the data from those different places and move them along your pipeline, you have next to no visibility of that, especially seeing as they can be inside someone else's network, for example. So you have no visibility of what's going on there. So having kind of the ability to draw all of this together in one place is from very hard to next to impossible for in a lot of cases. And it's only really when something goes wrong, someone realizes that something was actually dependent on something else. And these can be small systems that are off to the side. Someone decides to do some maintenance, that takes it offline, but they didn't realize actually that data has been pulled from and pushed into a different system, compiled again and moved on. So there have been some real cases of that happening that we've seen over the years.
Okay. Well, speaking of things going wrong, there's the term remediation. And can you tell me about remediation in terms of data pipeline orchestration?
Yeah, so remediation is a big win for me in terms of the orchestration, because we take the pieces that were once disparate, maybe manually driven, maybe on a schedule, these basic concepts of automation that we have, and then we take them and we put them together into the orchestration platform, which then has the end-to-end visibility of what's going on. But on top of that, we have the ability to gather and collect statistics over time. So all the time the processes and workflows are running through, it's gathering statistics on what should happen. Now, if we see a deviation from the normal, that can be flagged ahead of time. And then on top of that, we can also program in various ways to remediate against that. So if we see something that's going to break our SLAs at the end of the process, we can take effective action through the automation platform and actually get ahead of those. Whereas before, what would happen is we get to a point where we get to the end goal, we want our report, and actually it's wrong. And it was wrong 8 hours ago because that's when the process started, but no one noticed. So you can't see that easily until you get to the end, and of course by then it's too late. So the remediation steps are varied from simply alerting an administrator to something going wrong to actually taking some action because the tool is aware of things that it can do to try and solve the problem. Perhaps something's running slowly, for example, so it then basically goes along and restarts it or kills off certain jobs that are known to cause a problem. Those sorts of things normally would take a person to do, and they have to be there. And obviously, if this is running 1 o'clock in the morning, you don't really want your administrators keeping an eye on it 24/7. The system can do that for you.
Yeah. What are some of the use cases where lack of remediation or where slow remediation, which is almost the same, causes problems? And can you quantify that cost? And I guess you could talk about, it's probably hard to quantify it in monetary terms, but maybe you can say something like it caused them to lose customers or it caused them to miss opportunities.
Yeah, so exactly that. And there is obviously a monetary value to that, but in terms of man hours, as a good example, if you look at what the sequence of events that starts with realizing that the end result, i.e. in this case, say a report that's going off to a regulatory body is wrong, then what happens first? Someone realizes it's wrong, hopefully the organization before the regulatory body. They then start the process of going to all the administrators they know that deal with that particular report. So they start at the data warehouse, they run through everything, they hopefully identify which part is wrong, they then start moving down the pipeline. So they're effectively swimming up the pipeline, if you like, to try and find the point at which it broke by stepping through all the hoops. And of course, each time they go to the next system, they're then bringing in the administrators of that system. So now suddenly this group is getting bigger. And of course, the clock's ticking. So now what's happened? Now it's been escalated. Now senior management are getting involved. Now maybe the C-suite are getting involved because this thing is now broken. And we've seen that also in the past, where we've got these situations where you've got the C-level on calls with 20 to 30 people, all trying to work out what went wrong. And, eventually you get to the problem, but of course it was, it maybe happened 6 hours ago, for example. Right. So now when you execute whatever it was that had gone wrong and fix it, because you've got to find the fault to start with, you've now got to churn that through the rest of the pipeline. So
Right.
now you've well and truly blown your SLA on getting that report out. So you've got a cost in terms of lots of man hours, very senior people probably getting involved. You've also got a cost in terms of actually missing your deadline, so your SLA is missed. So there's potentially a problem there. So that's just one use case. And as you said around the kind of customers, if this was a workflow that pipeline that was designed around say your website, or getting orders through, or getting invoices out, or even getting utility bills out to customers. These are all things that are going to be knocked on, but the process is still the same. You have to track back through the pipeline to work out which bit went wrong. If you don't have an orchestration platform in place that actually brings it all together in one place for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm sure you don't want to get your C-level executive involved in this, and that would be the last thing you want to do, but it happens, I guess.
Definitely the last thing they want to do.
Exactly. They have other
Especially
things.
on Saturday mornings when I've been involved in a few of these calls.
Yeah, and probably it occurs just before reports are needed, and the C-level executives are busy doing what they have to do for the reports. Right?
Yeah, and if you think about how inefficient the process is, so everything's timed, for example. So everything's timed to go, well, this roughly takes 30 minutes, so we'll give you an hour. This is roughly 45 minutes, so we'll give it an hour and a half. Now, if you look at all the time you've wasted in between there where nothing is happening because you've tried to schedule it out so that you can stagger it correctly, there's a lot of wasted time there and inefficiency in terms of how quickly that data actually could make it to the destination if it was just being pushed every time something finished, it moved along. So there's a sort of saving there as well in terms of, okay, actually we could do this quicker, but also, yeah, exactly that. By the time you found the problem, you've blown your SLA already, and then it's going to take you another X amount of hours to actually get the data right.
Okay. All right. Now, we talked a lot about the sort of the challenges and the reasons and the problems we can solve. Let's talk about the tools. I mean, how do we solve these problems? What are the tools that are available in the market to improve data pipeline orchestration?
Yeah. So in the traditional sense, we've covered a couple of these sort of siloed tools that are in existence. So we've got things like Windows Task Scheduler, for example. You've got cron on Linux, that type of thing. These are all schedulers, but they all work on one specific machine or one specific place. So they don't have the ability to span different systems or different technologies. So they're very limited. This is even a problem now in the cloud, for example, with Airflow. Clouds can't talk to each other. They can't talk to on-premise. They're very limited in what they can do in their scope. They're great at what they do. They're essential, but they can't push past those boundaries. So really, that's when organizations start to look at a workload automation and a service orchestration tool that is actually a fully fledged platform designed specifically to allow for automation and visualization of processes and workflows and data pipelines across an entire organization, and indeed outside it as well, and bring all of those pieces together. So that's what really we would be talking about here in terms of orchestrating a pipeline. It is a platform designed, thoroughbred to do those specific activities.
So I don't know, I guess you sort of touched on it, but talk about how are the tools used now? What tools how do you use the tools to solve these problems across multiple platforms? And
yeah, so I like to look at this as kind of a spider, if you like. So you have a central administration point, a central monitoring point, which is essentially the heart of the tool, so the body of the spider, if you like. And then beyond that, you have essentially what form the legs, which are the agents that then reach out into the on-premise network, they reach out into the cloud, they reach out to SaaS platforms. They reach out to whatever is needed. When we talk about data pipeline, of course, something else we've not even spoken about really is the formats. The formats of this can be completely different. It could be someone gives something to us in Excel, someone gives something to us in CSV, something's via an API, some parts of it are by data-based transfers. We need something that brings all of that together, and that's essentially what the tool then does. It brings all of those parts together, be they coming from a REST API, because it's a platform that's a SaaS platform, be they a file, be they a database job that's triggered, be they an SAP job that's triggered. All of these things are basically then brought into one place. So we can have hundreds, thousands of different jobs and tasks that we have at our fingertips that we can then bring into a workflow from end to end that tells us exactly what's going to happen and when, and what parts are dependent on what parts, so that we have all the pieces lining up. So if we have 8 systems that produce one part of this puzzle, and they all have to run in sync and do their parts, exactly the right stages, we can bring that in, and we can show that, and we can say, right, these 8 systems need to do their bit. They're going to go off and do that part. When they get to finishing, they're going to put their data here, and then we're going to pick it up, and we're going to move it into this next part, and then we're going to process it into that system. And then once that's finished, we're going to pull it back out, and we're going to move it on. So it's bringing and orchestrating all of those pieces together in the tool, and that's exactly what the tool does.
Okay, all right. And then I'd imagine that you don't just go out and buy this at the grocery store, but you probably have to have somebody run a project for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit how that works, and how does a project to apply these tools look? How does it get?
Yeah, exactly. So and for me, the biggest part of it to solve on the off is the scope. These products have a wide scope, very big scope that we can bring in. So we need to have a defined scope to start with. What are we doing? Are we solving the data pipeline so that we're actually orchestrating that pipeline? Or are we going bigger than that, and we're going to solve more problems and more pipelines? Or are we going to bring in some automation around the activities that are happening on those systems we're orchestrating as well? So, for example, one key thing that can often go wrong with data pipelines is maintenance windows. So once your pipeline's up and running, that's lovely. It's going to flow through all the data. Everything's hunky-dory, and then we hit a maintenance window on one of the systems that no one was aware of was going to impact our data pipeline. That knocks that system out, and of course causes the problems. Now, we can bring those maintenance jobs into our orchestration platform because it's what it does. And then we can tell it, don't run any of this stuff while we're running our pipeline, and make sure the maintenance windows never collide with our key critical workflows that are going through. Because we've then brought that into one place, again, it's a bit like negotiating traffic.
Right.
We're effectively bringing all the control and all the measures into one place, and we can see it all.
Right.
Because it's very hard to see, for example, all the SAP jobs that are running, because they're in SAP. So someone in a central point can't see what's happening. So if we bring all of that and move it into our platform, suddenly now we can see it all in one place, and we can make sure we don't hit those really avoidable problems with our pipeline. Obviously issues will happen, and we can remediate for those, but we shouldn't be getting into a situation where maintenance windows are bumping up against our pipeline and causing problems. So in this sort of scenario, we can work around that. But again, that needs to be defined as the scope. Is that something we're doing, or are we not worried about that? We're just going to orchestrate our pipeline. So once we've got our scope, then we need to work out the best way of dealing with this. Now, clearly, if we've got hundreds of systems involved, then we need to work out the best way of getting to a realistic way of moving forwards with a design. So we need to clearly design, clearly understand all of the pieces that are moving, the workflow, and we'll do all the analysis part. And then we need to work out the best way of implementing that. Generally, we've seen a phased approach because it's very hard to go big bang with something like this. So we start to orchestrate key parts that aren't orchestrated currently, and bring those in, and then just gradually build that picture up. And that's the key way to success. And it's generally a way a lot of the projects are delivered these days, in terms of trying to deal with what's really in front of you, freeing up pieces. We're freeing up time, hopefully, from administrators all along the way here, so we can actually give them some time back. We can then allow them to help more in the process of building the thing out. And obviously, if we're not hitting problems because we're starting to automate parts of this, again, we're freeing time up to tackle, say, more complex parts of the puzzle. So, for example, building an API into a supplier and orchestrating that might take a little bit more effort, because that's not in our control within the organization. So if we've got a bit more time freed up, we can go and have those conversations and get to the best design for how that's going to work going forwards.
Okay.
And then obviously, we grow and we build from there. This is a product that it's not going to stay still. You know, it should spider out into more areas of the business, even if we decided at the beginning wasn't perhaps something we were interested in. That's where we should be moving.
What is meant by self-service in terms of the data pipeline?
Yeah, so obviously, you know, we have the structure where the data pipeline is run on a schedule. So we have our data arrive at a specific point in time that goes out for reports or invoicing, website, you know, maintenance, whatever it is that we're doing. So that's one thing. The other scenario that has appeared in recent times is around the ability for data scientists and data analysts who are becoming more critical to organizations, you know, on a daily basis, to actually trigger these things all themselves. So they want to have the refreshes of data when they need them, rather than waiting for them to appear. And of course, when you have 100 systems involved in your pipeline, that becomes a problem, because you've then got to call up 100 different points of contact to get them to run all the individual parts to make sure your data pipeline is organized. Because of course, as we've said, these are disparate systems. They're not attached to each other. There is no one job that someone runs and it just tells all the rest of them, okay, this is what we're doing. You know, we need to get this end result out. So the idea that someone could go to a website, a portal, you know, worst case, you know, contact an operator of the automation platform and say, I need this data refresh now, and it all be orchestrated from start to finish with no problems. And not only that, of course, as we've touched on before, avoid any potential dependency issues or maintenance windows or anything like that that's occurring at the same time, you know, because these systems are busy doing other things. So if we're running a giant processing in SAP, for example, we don't want to be running our pipeline at the same time potentially, so we might need to wait. Mm-hmm. And the automation platform is capable of understanding that and saying, okay, I know you want your data pipeline, I know there's a criticality behind it, but this has already started and I need to wait for this to finish. So that's all just built into the product. That's not even having to think about this. You know, we've configured our product, we've designed it in this way that it can already understand I can't do this. And because I can't do that, I can't kick off the other 10 jobs that are waiting on that one. So I'm going to have to hold the whole thing. And this becomes a really interesting concept, that we can just do this as and when we like. And you know, the fact that we can use trigger-based automation in this as well, where you know we could have a website or a portal where you know these data analysts can go and press a button on a web form or something like that, and you know that comes into the automation platform and says, "Hey, you need to start this workflow up." You know, that becomes quite an interesting thing. Or we could even have an external trigger which you know says a new file has arrived, because perhaps there has been a mistake somewhere that you know a supplier or someone external has realized. That can also trigger our automation platform and start it all off again. You know, so the concept of moving away from just a scheduled process that gets to our end result to something that we can actually trigger when and where we like is quite an interesting one, really.